And it's good to be with you today. And thank you for taking time to join us, whether it's right now while we're live or sometime later today or later this week. This morning, we want to continue our journey through Water for the Way, our Lenten devotional that we're working through in this Lenten season. It's really a great read, and there's a lot of good thoughts that the author has brought out in the daily devotions. And today we want to look at the Wednesday, and the question of the devotion, or the title is, "What shall I do with this people?" And the story comes from Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. But as we start the scripture, I want to ask you, have you ever been going somewhere on a trip, maybe with a carload of kids, or maybe just with, doesn't have to be kids, and are we there yet? We keep asking that question. Are we there yet? I'm so bored. And maybe you've been on a journey that's taken some time, and there's been a lot of complaining and grumbling amidst the journey. I know there have been some times when I've had to fly, not recently, but in years gone by, where the flight was delayed or things happened. And it was just, I'll tell you, it was just miserable. I remember one time being stuck in the Pittsburgh airport, probably over 35 years ago, or close to that, just stuck and couldn't go anywhere, and there was nothing to do. So let's look at what shall I do with his people? Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages. As the Lord commanded, they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. And people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And this is the word of the Lord. So we know that this is a common theme with the people of Israel on this journey. In fact, there were a number of issues where there was complaints and contention. I do want to give us a couple of notes on the scripture. It says, from the wilderness of Sin. It's important to note here that Sin is the geographical area of Sinai. We're not talking about sin with a little s. The sin in this is a capital S. So we're talking about the area, the geographical area of Mount Sinai. And the other thing to note here is it says they journeyed by stages. Literally, this is just referring to, they built their tents, they camped for a while, they stayed there, and then they collected everything and went down a little more. And so just think about it progressing in a journey. And so that's what the stages are about. Place to place, relocating as the Lord led them in this journey. And what we really see here is we see this lack of gratitude. Now, granted, when we're thirsty and we want something to drink and there's no water, it's not that maybe the time wasn't trying or difficult, but part of the problem here is this, there was an overall lack of gratitude and an overall lack of understanding for what the Lord had done for them. He had delivered them out of the hands of their evil taskmasters, their slave masters. But this was a people that had, although they were worked hard and were treated badly and were used, they were used to a rhythm of life, and they got out of this rhythm of life. And so in this situation, it's kind of interesting. They saw themselves through basically two lenses. The author points out. Both Israel saw themselves both as victims and as God's elect. And so he points out that this tension divided their spirit. And I got to thinking about how often does that happen to us? We see ourselves as God's children. he reached out to us, and we responded to him, and we walk in relationship with him. But we face difficulty, or we face challenges, and we see ourselves as a victim. Why does it have to be this way? Oh God, why me? Kind of thing. Almost a martyr syndrome sometimes. And we get to complaining. And, I have to admit, sometimes when I find myself in difficulty, I have to be careful not to result to this serial complaining. The Israelites had turned into becoming serial complainers. They found fault with everything. The manna was just, after a while they just got enough of it. They didn't, can we have meat? And they were totally lost on the idea that in the midst of the desert, that God was providing for them food every day. They didn't have to go hunt and find it. It was there. And, we know they had issues with that as well. They were told, take, only what you need. And some of them decided to hoard, and then it would rot because they didn't listen to God. The only time they were supposed to take a double portion was on the eve of the Sabbath, so that they didn't have to go and hunt food on the Sabbath, so to speak. And they were just all messed up. I've highlighted this here. The author talks about comparison, competition, complaining, and conflict arose out of this wrong self-image that they had, that, we're God's elect, we're chosen, we shouldn't have to have any difficulty. And they just had such a wrong perspective, and they had a poor self-image. And the author reminds us that a balanced self-image comes from seeing Christ-likeness in ourselves and in others. They had pride. We're God's chosen. And they put up this, they had this puffed upness. And this was a problem not only in the desert, but, we see really throughout the life of Israel that this puffed upness was a problem. As I was reading this and seeing some of the author's thoughts on this devotional, I was thinking about how the Pharisees were known. Jesus, spoke against this, about how they were known for praying out loud and making a scene of their prayers and making a scene of their fasting. And often Jesus talked about how we shouldn't do these things to be seen or to be recognized. And I think all that was a root of their puffed upness because of who they were. And a Pharisee man would pray, several things they prayed every day. They thanked God that they were Jews. They thanked God that they were men and not women. And they had this view of themselves, this self-image that was not healthy and was not at all the image that Christ taught us that we ought to have. Paul reminds the church at Rome that, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourselves more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. May we walk in the power of humility. That is the point of this. And in this season of Lent, of examination and saying, Lord, is there anything in me that you want to refine? Perhaps this is a good time for us to say, Lord, am I walking humbly? Are we reminded, or do we need to be reminded of who we are and whose we are? The children of Israel, in the midst of all of this, had very clouded vision. They had a very confused image of who they were. They were a puffed up people. They shouldn't have to suffer. They were God's elect. Why do we have to put up with this? And Moses, why did you bring out of here? Totally forgetting, totally leaving. I mean, it hadn't been that long since they had been delivered from terrible things. But they lost sight of that. And they had a very, very bad image of who they are and whose they were. May it be a reminder for us today to think about who we are and whose we are. And maybe ask the Lord to help us in having a better self-image and not to be puffed up believing that we are better than most or that we should be above certain challenges in life because of who we are. Well, thank you for joining this morning. I want to share this prayer from the devotional as we leave this time together and pray, and just pray that you have a blessed and wonderful day. The prayer says, Lord, hear our cry. Only you know our struggle. Some days complaining and murmuring does feel good in the moment, until we discover the power of your listening ear. Prayer is our resort and resolve. Help us to remember to bring everything to you, O Lord, in prayer. I know that's my prayer for me, that when it seems tough, to discover the power of the listening ear of the Lord. Let us go together in his grace and in his peace. Lord bless you.